Hey, what is up, everybody? This is Stevie Breach coming to you here today. It is summertime. I'm home from softball. I think it's like 9 o'clock at night. Tonight was night 2 of the Who Killed WCW doc on, hey, I told you to keep that on Vice. I was kind of skeptical about the first episode of a documentary. It kind of wasn't as good as the WWE version. I honestly didn't think it went over all that well with me. Episode 2, honestly, very, very good. Episode opened with talks about Bret the Hitman Hart. I was yelling at the documentary, tell us who Bret is. Tell us how big of a deal it is that Bret signed to come to WCW. They answered that very fastly, but they still really haven't explained how big of a deal Bret Hart was to come to WCW. He was hand-delivered easily. If not their number 1, their number 2, maybe their number 3 guy of WWE. That is like the number 3 guy at Coke being handed to Pepsi. Basically being like, hey, I know that we're in an all-out war right now, but this number 3 guy just isn't cutting it anymore. And if you want him, you can have him. Everybody knows that, Bret at one point was the big star for WWF. Vince wanted to keep him, didn't think he had enough money to keep him. He was falling, he was falling in the ratings. It was a bad time for wrestling. Titan Towers and WWE was making all kinds of cutbacks. They took the water coolers out of the towers and things like that. And Bret and Vince made a deal that it was like a 20-year deal to keep him in the company for as long as he wanted to wrestle and to keep him around as long as he wanted to be there on the other side, helping out the company. One thing led to another. Bret fell out of favor. Shawn became the number 1 guy. And, Vince came to Bret and said, hey, I can't pay you. We're just basically going to cut the deal. If you can go to WCW, see if they can give you the same deal or a better deal, and take it. That's it. Austin was heating up. Undertaker was dependable. Shawn right there was the number 1 guy. But that was a risk for Vince to cut ties with Bret and just say, you know what, you and Shawn just are not getting along. We can't have business where, the top 2 guys can't have matches because you guys can't get along. You guys can't decide who's going to pass the belt back and forth. And we can't, make Undertaker a transitional champion every single time we want to pass this belt back and forth. It's a real big deal that basically, Bret leaves and goes to WCW. And almost instantaneously at the Royal Rumble, Shawn Michaels, gets injured. It's a back injury that would take him out of wrestling for, I believe, 6 years. He would do the job to Austin. Austin becomes the number 1 guy in the company. But none of that's set in stone. And you're going to tell me you're going to take Shawn Michaels off the table and, you're not going to need Bret. That's just surprising. I think Bret Hart is huge to the Monday Night War deals. And the fact that WCW couldn't deliver ratings or any kind of storyline with Bret. He never really got anything going. To this day, I was the biggest NWO fan that I know. I still don't know why Bret joined the NWO. He came, he debuted. He was the tag team guy. He stopped the bad count at Starrcade. So he went against Hogan. And then just months later, just is walking out on TV with Hogan, helping him out and sitting on the car with Eric Bischoff wearing the NWO shirt. I didn't get it then. I still don't get it now. No clue. But Bret, to me, honestly, he's not my number 1. He's not my number, in my top 10. Maybe in my top 10. But that's debatable. And I know there's people out there, like my best friend Freaking Yay 88, and if he hears this, he's gonna send me a shot. But I understand it, because I think he's up there on his list. Bret is the one guy in the wrestling business that came from the wrestling business. His father owned a wrestling company. Bret talks about wrestling like he really believes he won those matches. He talks about he beat Austin. He beat Taker. Somebody told him to win those matches. That's why he won them. It could have been anybody else. It was his work ethic. It was his wrestling skills. It was his promo ability, and basically his good looks that got him into the spot that he was in. Those are the things that he should really harp on. That is why he's there. When he talks about the wrestling business, when he talks about WWF, when he talks about WCW, he talks about basically like he was in those fights like they were real. I don't get it. From there we go to Goldberg. And Goldberg talking about, basically, it's the first time I've ever really heard Goldberg admit he didn't know what he was doing and that he was green. They talked about the match, him and Scott Hall on Monday Nitro, the same night as the Hulk Hogan match in Atlanta. It was kind of like a surprise. They told us on Thunder that the match was going to happen. It was going to be a dark match. Then all of a sudden it became a TV match. And then as you're watching Nitro, they throw up that Goldberg is going to have to go through Scott Hall in order to get the match against Hogan later that night on Nitro. Enough for you to be like, oh shit, maybe he's going to lose. Maybe they're going to screw him. Maybe it's going to be an NWO takeover. Maybe that's why this was on Nitro and it's not on a pay-per-view. And we're not going to get Goldberg versus Hogan tonight. I think it was just to drive ratings as a surprise of like, oh shoot, we got to keep it on Nitro to see what's going on. Goldberg was the biggest thing in wrestling in 1998 besides for Stone Cold Steve Austin. Goldberg was so over, he should have been able to do something with that company. I think honestly at the time it was the 3-hour show. I think it's what's killed WWE Monday Night Raw to this day. I think it's killed SmackDown. When it was 3 hours, it's too long to sit in front of your television. It's the same thing that I have to say about AEW pay-per-views. Yes, you're getting your money's worth, but it's too damn long. I think a 2-hour show, you can have two 2-hour shows in the same week. You can do Raw, you can do SmackDown, you can do Nitro, you can do Thunder. I think Thunder was even a 1-hour show back in the day. And then you can give us the 3-hour pay-per-view. But all of that doesn't make any sense. And it's just too much. They talked about it later in the show when they talked about I was going to try and reveal this at the end. The overall basis, I don't even know what the title of the show was, but to me, this was the Eric Bischoff era of Nitro that they were covering. I thought that this was a better documentary than the Eric Bischoff documentary that WWE made, even though it was only 1 hour. They sort of touched on it in episode 1 where Eric came from, in the AWA with Vern selling Star Wars. And that led to him, getting a job as a third announcer in WCW. Didn't really cover that well how he became the president of the company so fast. It's just basically like he did a good interview, and even though he was an announcer in the company, he wasn't in the wrestling business. He wasn't a wrestler, and that's not who they wanted running the company, was another wrestler. They figured that, they've tried Ric Flair, they tried Dusty Rhodes, they needed something different to get them over the hump to be more of a competition for WWF and Vince McMahon at the time. But I thought, honestly, the episode was really, really good. The next episode is going to be covering Vince Russo. That one, honestly, should be really, really fun. I was able to be at 2 of the Nitro events they talked about on this show. I was at Hogan versus Goldberg at the Georgia Dome. I was at the Finger Poke of Doom Um, Both of those were really, really good shows. Honestly, the Hogan show had 40,000 people, yes. The Finger Poke of Doom, WCW was still over. They were starting to slip. They were starting to lose the battle. The place was still full, but I just don't think it was 40,000 people. I was a big NWO fan, a big Kevin Nash fan. I was stunned at the Finger Poke of Doom, but the fact that the NWO was coming back together. We had the original NWO, Kevin Nash, and oh shoot, oh well, screw it. Oh, there we go. Kevin Nash, the Macho Man. They didn't really think things were going for them, so they split off. They made the Wolf Pack, and they had made wars. They had tried to do Scott Hall versus Kevin Nash a few times, but I don't think they ever really had a real big Kevin Nash versus Hulk Hogan match. So you never really saw the real big NWO versus NWO match. They did things like the War Games when they had the 3 different teams. They had NWO, NWO Wolfpack, Team WCW. They did a battle royal on MTV where it was like Snow Bowl or Battle Snows. It was something MTV-ish where they put the NWO B team in the Wolf Pack and Goldberg in a battle royal in the snow. So we had kind of seen it, but you never really got the real battle. So to have the NWO under one roof, even though it caused a division of the NWO Wolfpack and the NWO B team of guys like Virgil, Stevie Ray, mostly the NWO Hollywood guys that got left behind, minus Hogan, minus Scott Steiner. Mr. Perfect kind of was on one team and then drifted over to the B team. I guess he was not too old, not hip enough, I guess. Luger is another guy. They wouldn't have put him on the B team, but I didn't understand him being in that version. I was just so pumped to get them back that I thought it was really, really cool. The fact that they talked about Goldberg versus Kevin Nash at Starrcade 1998, I can tell you that I bought that on pay-per-view. Kevin Nash was over. Kevin Nash as a babyface to go up against Goldberg, I thought was a really good match. As a wrestling fan, as somebody who purchased WCW pay-per-views and watched Nitro, I felt that Nitro and WCW never really put up a good enough competitor for Goldberg that you believed in. The fact that they were taking the strap off of Kevin Nash and putting it on Goldberg, I thought was a real good kick in the pants for them and put them in another direction. The one thing that they talked about in this is that they didn't have another direction for Goldberg to go. That's where the Finger Poke of Doom came into play, with him being arrested for stalking Miss Elizabeth. And even though they set up a storyline where basically it was going to be Goldberg was going to have to defeat members of the NWO to get to Hogan for him to get his belt back. I think that was the storyline that was starting. On Thunder, Goldberg ended up going in the back and trying to beat up a limousine that the NWO was in, and he cut a tendon in his arm, and he was injured and he wasn't able to wrestle. So we never even able to see that storyline start to see where it was going to go. But if you remember, like Randy Orton versus CM Punk at WrestleMania 26, Orton each week on the way to WrestleMania eliminated one person from Nexus. So it wouldn't be Orton versus 7 guys come WrestleMania. It would be a one-on-one match. So I think that's basically where they were going with Goldberg versus the NWO to get them in a new direction, but we were never able to get there. But the fact that WCW had Bret the Hitman Hart, they had Kevin Nash, who, big sexy, that dude was the man. I don't care what you say, 5 Moves of Doom or anything like that. That guy was over. That guy was cool. even when he got the book from Eric Bischoff to be the booker of WCW, I think that Bischoff believed in him because Kevin Nash was somebody that knew mainstream what was going on in the world. He knew what the hot topic was. He knew what was cool and was going to be able to point them in the right direction. But there was so many people in the Time Warner or AOL Time Warner company that was pointing WCW in the wrong direction on purpose, that I think at that point you were able to see the doom that was coming. I think that people believe they could get it back on track. I think that's why Russo's got to come in next week. But I don't know. Bischoff did a lot of good for WCW. The NWO was great. Conan talked about the luchadors getting a push. That was something that we had never seen before. WWF was a big man territory. They tried the cruiserweight division, like with Essa Rios and Taka Michinoku, that, was pushed on television for a hot minute, and it was done. They kept that belt around. I mean, Essa Rios, Taka Michinoku was that champion for, felt like an eternity. I don't even know when he defended that belt, but they still had him come out with it. I think that was probably on, the pre-shows of pay-per-views and things like that. They didn't push that type of wrestler. They didn't show that type of wrestling. If you weren't, the 6'5" with muscles guy, or you were like the big fat guy, they just didn't have room for you. It just wasn't what that company was done. But he made a lot of money. He put that company on the back. He turned a profit with the company that never turned a profit before. Eric Bischoff, one of the biggest names there is in wrestling, WWF Hall of Famer, should be a TNA Hall of Famer. He's never going to see the AEW Hall of Fame, even that thing comes around, but he can't get along with Tony. But I don't know. Damn good podcaster. I appreciate him. Thank you very much. We'll get into Vince Russo next week.